Hello there and welcome back, and hope you are seated because it's happening. Mythic Plus just received some of the best changes we have seen coming in Season 2, with a lot of stuff being addressed that people have had problems with over the course of the last patch, ever since the expansion launched. From casts, from tank busters, from timers, from RP situations, from crests and loot and dungeons and key difficulty and all of that. So let's quickly read it out, unscripted freestyle, because this came in just recently and we want to get this out for you guys ASAP. Now, there are a couple of Wowhead articles that you can check, and the links are down in the description where you can read these in details, but I will go over all of the changes right now so you know what to expect and why this is such a good PTR cycle, let's say, with this week. Gilded crests as a reward will be available from +7s and going forward, and with this we actually have a breakdown of all of the rewards when it comes to the next season in Mythic Plus, and you're probably going to see it right now on the screen. When it comes to the dungeon difficulty, the scaling of the dungeon with the health and damage of the mobs, and the affixes as well, there's a bunch of changes, so let's talk about it right now. The biggest change, starting off with Mythic dungeons, is that champion gear will be rewarded in Mythic Plus straight up, as opposed to the current veteran track that we have right now. And you can see it at the end of the run that you start with champion 2 and then 3 and 4 and so on, with hero track dropping at +6s. This is down from the current +7 that we have on live. Similarly, the rune crests kind of shifted 1 point up to keep up in tune with the actual end of the dungeon reward, where you actually get rune crests at 6 and then start looting gilded at 7 with 10 gilded off the bat. And we know from the 1107 changes to the rewards, if you fail a key, you don't just kind of lose almost all of your crests, you kind of lose 4. So overall, if you fail a +7, you still get 6 gilded crests, which is really good, and this keeps scaling up. Another thing to know that has changed for the dungeons is how these dungeons actually scale. If I am not mistaken, on live right now, the dungeon scale with +11% per dungeon. What this means is that from 2 to 3, every mob gets +11% more health and damage. So this scales dungeons a little bit higher than what we will have in Season 2, where they scale with 7% for each key level, as opposed to the 11%, making each dungeon, first of all, a little bit easier to get into, but to get to the higher dungeons is going to be a little bit quicker, since the mobs won't have as much HP and they won't have as much damage relative to your player power level if we compare it to Season 1. With that in mind, we also need to address the fact that the affix is changed. The possibly best change for the affix is that the challenger sparrow, you know, the one where if you die you lose 15 seconds off of your timer, that has been moved to +12. Yes, this is particularly fantastic for the majority of the player base, since most players do keys up until 12, so most players will probably never encounter the Challenger Sparrow affix at all, since realistically there's not a big incentive to do anything past +10, with the exception of a couple of extra gilded crests, since +10 keys will actually reward you with the myth track gear in the vault. More on that in a second. Now, to change and kind of readapt the affixes, on +4 we will get the bargain affixes, which are the Zealotath, Kisker's affixes, you know, do this, get a buff, or fail it, the enemies get buffed. That's on the +4 right now. And Fortified or Tyrannical will start with +7, and the +10 will have the alternative one. So if you get Fortified at a +7, you'll get Tyrannical at a +10, kind of like what we do right now. And another change, even for high key pushers, because Blizzard hasn't forgotten you as well, with a +12, the Guile affix that used to also increase the damage and HP of all the mobs by 10% is just giving you the Challenger Sparrow at the moment, as far as we know. And with this, what this translates in as of per their developer notes is, if you are a more casual player, or maybe you're starting off with delves, to start gearing up with delves and you want to transition into Mythic Plus, you're not immediately shoved into a +7 if you just want to do the key that just gives you upgrades, right? That just gives you a straight up hero track with gilded crest as a reward. You can first of all do that in 16 at the moment, which is 1 key lower, and that 16 is equivalent kind of to the current version of a +4, let's say, if we're gonna use some kind of weird cooked up math, since the way the dungeons scale for each level is way more approachable than what we have right now in the season, and a +6 will have +40% HP and damage for all of the mobs, comparable to a Mythic 0, as opposed to what it would have been about, what, 70% on live, which is almost double. So the dungeons will also be easier. Now, of course, you don't have to start with 6s or 7s to get hero track. You can start lower to learn the mechanics, but if you do intend to just jump into where the rewards are, then you'll have an easier time getting in. Mechanics will be less punishable, and the dungeon will just be overall easier. Now, when it comes to the mechanics, that is another big point that has changed as well. A lot of the mechanics have been nerfed in the dungeon, and this is probably one of the biggest pain points that we've had with Mythic Plus in Season 1 and in Season 2, testing it on the PTR. Cast timers have been increased, damage of abilities has been reduced, overlapping mechanics have kind of been spread out a little bit. We hope we're still gonna be testing this out, and by the way, we will be doing all of these changes. We'll be testing all of these changes on stream live today and for the rest of the week, so you can catch us on twitch.tv/Marcelian online, or even right here on YouTube when we go live, and we're going to be playing all of these dungeons and see how good these changes are, because they look very, very good on paper. And that's just great overall as a concept, because dungeons being a little bit too punishing has been a detriment to a lot of people trying to push the keys. One thing that has been announced for Season 2 that we obviously haven't played with so far is that keys will no longer deplete if you manage to get to, well, what was it before, 2,850 dungeon points. They will not deplete anymore. That has changed as well. First of all, that also included a new recolored mount for the season that was kind of like a recolored version of the KSM mount. Now that has been moved to 3,000 in terms of score to kind of adapt to the changes in difficulty, since dungeons are relatively easier in Season 2, not only because mechanics have been nerfed, but also their scaling has been nerfed a little bit. But the deplete has also been changed. Now, starting with the keys 12s and higher, whenever you complete all of your 12s, presumably in time, the key will no longer deplete below that, and you keep going higher and higher. That applies to +13s, that applies to +14s, so you will not be able to deplete your key past the level of a key that you've completed on that level on all of the dungeons. That is, first of all, a great change in terms of how depletion should work. We actually believe that that should happen way earlier, because depletion is a problem that keeps people from getting to that point and creates the lever situation. So although this is great that it lets people that want to push keys have an easier time, it doesn't make sense if you're a person that wants to do a +13 that you have to do a 12 again, even though you've completed all your 12s. So this is a great change. We can only hope that this applies ideally across the board, but if anything, Marcelian's take, which is a very good one, is basically put this starting with a +7, where your hero track starts to drop, where your gilded crest, aka the best currency for upgrading gear, drops. Put that at 7 as well, so once you've completed all of your 7s, the key doesn't drop anymore. Maybe we can have this across the board, but at the very least include the majority of the player base that plays Mythic Plus to also benefit from this change, since from 12s and upwards, 90% of the players will probably never see this change in the game. Now, some specific things that you might have seen or heard. You might have played dungeons like Dark Flame Cleft, that is notoriously known for its minecart RP situation at the end of the dungeon, where you first of all have to stay in the darkness and kind of follow the little track around, but also once you get to the last boss, if you die for whatever reason, you have to do the whole minecart RP again, where you have to shoot out the dynamites. Those have been addressed as well, where first of all the RP has been sped up, so it's a lot quicker, so you can go through all of the sluggish parts of Dark Flame a lot quicker, which is very good. A lot of the feedback was about just kind of removing this entirely. Now, I understand why they probably wouldn't want to, because that's kind of the point of the dungeon, but speeding it up is good, and also increasing the dungeon timers is also a good thing, because, you know, if you're gonna give me a 5-minute RP, then increase the timer of the dungeon by 5 minutes. It's not a great time to invest those 5 minutes in, because Mythic Plus in and of itself is a concept of a content that is fast-paced, that wants to keep you engaged in the zone. But the other side of the coin is that, you know, you actually have a couple of minutes to like chill for a little bit before you ready yourself for the last part of the dungeon. Either way, the changes are definitely good, because they make it a lot more approachable, especially with the timers. The timers that we've had so far apply to Cinderbrew Meadery, where it's now 33 minutes to clear it in time, up from the previous 30 minutes. We also have it for Dark Flame Cleft, which is, funnily enough, 34 minutes, up from the previous 30 minutes as well. So we have 4 extra minutes to complete the dungeon, which definitely accounts for a bunch of DRP runs. And probably a more important thing, I think, but not to dismiss all the changes so far, is that when we now have graveyards, aka spawn points. When you die in one of these dungeons, you kind of were sent back to the beginning. For instance, for Rookery, you had a griffin that you would take that would kind of fly you past to the second boss or the third boss, depending on where you were. Now you just spawn, I believe after you kill the first boss, you just spawn downstairs in the barracks, which is great. Same thing happened to Primary of Sacred Flame with the second boss. You can also spawn deeper into the dungeon. I believe Dark Flame also has another graveyard. Once you defeat Blazicon, it updates to the Waxatori. And this is another thing that people have been talking about for years and wanting to have into the dungeons, is just make sure that we don't just walk so much back to where we were once we died. So what does all of this mean for you, in case you haven't played the PTR or have watched any videos or streams of people playing the PTR? The grand scheme of things, all of these are amazing changes. All of the mobs will hit you for less. There will be fewer mechanics that you have to know and kind of juggle in between. There will be fewer casts and more easier to interrupt casts. There will be previously, which I didn't mention, mobs that had spells that you couldn't interrupt that now you can interrupt. You'll have to walk less to your corpse if you die, because you'll have checkpoint, and you will be penalized less for dying because the Challenger's Peril has been moved up. You'll get quicker rewards, better rewards at lower key levels. The key levels will scale in an easier fashion than what you do on live, so jumping from one key to the other, the gap between them will be less punishing, and a bunch of other annoying mechanics have been dialed down. This is one of the biggest change we've seen for Mythic Plus that has been announced ever since they've released the War Within, and we've tested it in the beta. The devs have actually put developer notes with their thought process behind all of this, which is fantastic. This is looking really great for season 2. Hopefully we can see a couple more by the time the season starts, because it's looking like it's going to be a whole different Mythic Plus season. And what better way to start the new Mythic Plus season with one of the best DPSers for season 2, which is Enhancement Shaman, that we talked about, and why this is such a great spec, especially when the dungeons are looking so good. Why not just have fun and deal a lot of damage on probably one of the best melee DPS specs in the game right here?